AITA for ruining my best friend's wedding after being her maid of honor. I'm still not sure if I'm the villain in this story or if my best friend completely lost her mind during wedding planning. Maybe both. For context, I've known Emily since we were 12 years old. We grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same schools, and stayed close even after college. We've been through a lot together: breakups, family problems, career changes. So when she got engaged last year, I was genuinely excited for her. Her fiancé, Mark, seemed like a great guy. Quiet, easygoing, the type who mostly stayed out of drama. About 2 weeks after the engagement, Emily asked me to meet her for brunch. Halfway through the meal, she pulled out a small box and slid it across the table. Inside was a bracelet with a little engraved charm. "Will you be my maid of honor?" she asked. Of course, I said yes. At the time, it felt like a huge honor. Looking back, I think that's where the trouble started. At first, wedding planning seemed normal. Emily created a group chat with the bridesmaids. There were 5 of us total. The early conversations were pretty standard: dress colors, venue ideas, bachelorette trip suggestions. Then things started escalating. The first issue was the bachelorette trip. Emily said she wanted something special. At first, we assumed a weekend somewhere nearby. Then she sent us a Pinterest board. It was filled with photos from Mykonos, yes, Greece, for a bachelorette party. When someone gently asked if she was serious, Emily said she had always dreamed of a destination girls trip. Flights alone would have been over $1,000 to $100 per person. One of the bridesmaids said she couldn't afford it. Emily's response was, "Well, this is a once-in-a-lifetime moment for me." That sentence became kind of a theme during the entire process. Anytime someone raised a concern, she'd say, "It's my once-in-a-lifetime wedding." Eventually, we compromised on a trip to Miami instead. Still expensive, but at least somewhat realistic. That should have been the first red flag. But things kept getting worse. Next came the bridesmaid dresses. Emily originally picked a simple style that cost around $180. Totally reasonable. Then about 2 weeks later, she changed her mind. She sent a new link. The new dresses were $450 each. Apparently, the first ones didn't photograph well enough. One bridesmaid, Sarah, said she might struggle with the cost because she had just started a new job. Emily responded in the group chat with, "If everyone can't commit to the vision, maybe they shouldn't be bridesmaids." The chat went silent for hours after that. Eventually, Sarah apologized and said she'd make it work. At that point, I started noticing something. Emily wasn't just stressed. She had become controlling. Everything had to be perfect, and perfect kept getting more expensive. As maid of honor, most of the responsibility fell on me. Planning the bridal shower, organizing the bachelorette trip, managing the bridesmaid group chat, fielding Emily's late-night calls about tiny details. For months, I tried to keep things smooth. But the closer the wedding got, the more intense Emily became. One night she called me crying because the florist said the exact shade of pink roses she wanted might not be available. Another time she made me drive with her to 3 different bakeries because the cake tasting didn't feel magical enough. I kept telling myself she was just stressed. Weddings do that to people. Then the seating chart drama happened. 2 weeks before the wedding, Emily sent me the seating chart to review. That's when I noticed something strange. Mark's younger sister, who he's extremely close with, was placed at a table in the back corner of the reception. Meanwhile, one of Emily's coworkers was seated at the head table. I asked her about it. Her response was, "Well, she's not really part of my side." I pointed out that it was Mark's sister. Emily shrugged. She survived. I told her Mark might feel weird about that. Emily got annoyed and said, "Why are you suddenly on his side?" That conversation ended with her hanging up on me. By the time the wedding week arrived, everyone was exhausted. The bridesmaids were walking on eggshells around Emily. Any small issue could trigger a meltdown. At the rehearsal dinner, She snapped at the venue coordinator because the candles on the tables were too warm-toned. But the moment that changed, everything happened the morning of the wedding. We were all getting ready in the bridal suite. Hairstylists, makeup artists, photographers, the whole thing. Everything seemed calm for once. Then Emily looked at the bridesmaids' dresses, specifically Sarah's. Sarah had ordered the same dress as everyone else, but because of supply delays, the boutique had sent a slightly different fabric version. Same color, same design, just a slightly different material. Honestly, I didn't even notice until Emily pointed it out. Emily immediately lost it. She started saying the photos would be ruined, that the aesthetic would be destroyed. Sarah looked like she was about to cry. Then Emily said something I still can't believe. She told Sarah she should sit out at the ceremony, just attend as a guest instead. On the wedding day, after Sarah had spent hundreds of dollars and months helping plan everything, the room went silent. Sarah actually started crying. That's when I finally stepped in. I told Emily she was being unreasonable. No one would notice. And even if they did, it wasn't worth humiliating one of her friends. Emily looked at me like I had betrayed her. Then she said something loud enough for the whole room to hear. "You're supposed to support me. That's literally your job, as maid of honor." I told her supporting her didn't mean agreeing with everything. The argument escalated quickly. Within minutes, we were basically yelling at each other. Emily accused me of undermining her wedding. I told her she was treating her friends like props instead of people. Finally, she said the words that still replay in my head. "If you don't like it, you can leave." So I did. I grabbed my bag and walked out of the bridal suite. I didn't go to the ceremony or the reception. I just drove home. A few hours later, my phone started blowing up. Messages from bridesmaids. Apparently, Emily had been furious after I left. She told everyone I had abandoned her on her wedding day. Some people agreed with her. Others thought she had gone too far. Sarah ended up staying in the ceremony after Mark apparently convinced Emily to drop the issue. But the damage was already done. Since then, Emily hasn't spoken to me. Mutual friends are split. Some say I should have just kept the peace for one day. Others say someone needed to stand up to her. All I know is this: 12 years of friendship ended over a wedding. And I still don't know if walking out made me the villain, or the only person who finally said what everyone else was thinking. So, AITA, update AITA for ruining my best friend's wedding after being her maid of honor. So I didn't expect my last post to get the amount of attention it did. A lot has happened since the wedding, and honestly, I'm still trying to process everything. Some of you said I should give it a few weeks before making any decisions, and I did. It's now been about 6 weeks since the wedding, and things have gotten messier. For anyone who didn't read the original post, here's the quick version. My best friend, Emily, asked me to be her maid of honor. Wedding planning slowly turned into a nightmare. She became extremely controlling. And on the morning of the wedding, she tried to remove one of the bridesmaids from the ceremony because her dress fabric was slightly different. I told her she was being unreasonable. She told me I could leave if I didn't support her. So I left, and I didn't attend the wedding. At the time, I assumed things would calm down after the honeymoon. Maybe we'd talk. Maybe we'd clear the air. That didn't happen. For about 3 days after the wedding, I didn't hear anything from Emily. What I did hear from were the other bridesmaids. Sarah, the one Emily almost kicked out of the ceremony, called me 2 days later. Apparently, things got even more tense after I left. From what she told me, Emily was furious. She kept saying I had sabotaged her wedding morning. But Mark, her now husband, apparently stepped in and told her she was overreacting. He convinced her to let Sarah stay in the ceremony. But according to Sarah, Emily spent the entire reception complaining about me to different guests, which hurt more than I expected. Not because I cared what random guests thought, but because we had been friends for over a decade. And suddenly I was the villain in the story she was telling everyone. About a week later, something else happened. The bridesmaid group chat, the one we'd used for months while planning the wedding, suddenly became active again. At first I assumed it was just people sharing photos. Instead, it turned into a very awkward conversation. One of the bridesmaids asked if everyone was okay after the wedding drama. Sarah responded first. She said she felt terrible about how everything went down and wished the morning hadn't turned into such a mess. Then another bridesmaid said something I didn't expect. She said she actually thought I had been right. Apparently the tension had been building for months and no one wanted to confront Emily because they were afraid of upsetting her. A couple other people agreed. But then another bridesmaid jumped in and said that regardless of what Emily did, I shouldn't have walked out on the wedding day. And suddenly the chat turned into a debate about whether I had overreacted. It felt like high school drama all over again. Eventually, someone asked the obvious question, has anyone talked to Emily? That's when things got quiet. Because apparently, none of them had. About 2 weeks after the wedding, Emily and Mark came back from their honeymoon. I still hadn't heard anything from her. No message, no call, nothing. Then one night I got a text from Mark. Not Emily. Mark. It just said, hey, do you have time to talk sometime? That caught me completely off guard. Mark and I had always gotten along fine, but we weren't exactly close. Most of our conversations over the years had been during group hangouts or holidays, so I agreed to meet him for coffee. When we sat down, he looked exhausted, not angry, not defensive, just tired. He said the weeks after the wedding had been stressful. Apparently, the wedding drama didn't magically disappear after the ceremony. Emily was still upset about what happened, but at the same time, she had started hearing from people that the situation might not have been entirely my fault. Some guests had noticed the tension that morning. Sarah had told a few mutual friends what happened, and the story Emily had been telling, that I randomly abandoned her for no reason, didn't exactly match up with everyone else's version. Mark said something else that stuck with me. He said he had been surprised by how intense Emily became during the wedding planning process, not because he thought she was a bad person, but because it didn't feel like the Emily he knew. Then Mark told me something I didn't know before. Apparently the seating chart argument I mentioned in my original post, the one where Emily tried to push his sister to a back table, had turned into a much bigger fight between them later. His sister had found out about it, and she was pretty hurt. According to Mark, it caused a huge argument the week before the wedding. That was news to me. I had assumed Emily just ignored my suggestion, but apparently the issue never actually got resolved. Mark didn't go into a ton of detail, but it sounded like there were already cracks forming before the wedding even happened. Then he asked me something unexpected. He asked if I thought Emily had always been like this, or if the wedding planning changed her. I didn't really know how to answer, because honestly, it felt like a little bit of both. About a week after that conversation, I finally got a message from Emily. Not a call, a text. It just said, I heard you talk to Mark, which immediately made me nervous. I told her yes. There was a long pause before she responded again. Then she wrote, I think we should talk. I agreed, but we still haven't actually had that conversation yet. We've both been busy with work. Schedules haven't lined up. Or maybe we're both avoiding it a little. Because the truth is, I'm not even sure what that conversation would look like. Part of me misses the friendship we had before all of this, but another part of me keeps thinking about everything that happened during those months of planning. The pressure, the arguments, the way she spoke to people, and the fact that when things fell apart, she told me to leave. So that's where things are right now. Emily and I haven't spoken in person yet. Mark and I have only had that one conversation. The bridesmaids still talk occasionally, But the group dynamic is definitely different now. Some people think the friendship can still be repaired. Others think too much has happened. Honestly, I'm not sure which side I'm on. Because the longer time passes, the more I start wondering whether that wedding argument was really the beginning of the conflict, or just the moment when everything that had been building for months finally exploded. Either way, I guess we'll find out what happens when Emily and I finally sit down and talk, if that conversation ever actually happens. Final update: AITA for ruining my best friend's wedding after being her maid of honor. So a lot of people asked for another update after my last post. The conversation with Emily finally happened. And honestly, it didn't go the way I expected. For anyone just catching up, the short version is Emily was my best friend for over 12 years. I was her maid of honor. Wedding planning turned her into what felt like a completely different person. And on the morning of the wedding, she tried to kick one of the bridesmaids out of the ceremony over a dress issue. I told her she was being unreasonable. She told me I could leave if I didn't support her. So I left. I skipped the wedding. Then weeks passed without us talking. In my last update, I mentioned that Emily had texted me saying we should talk. That conversation finally happened about 2 days ago. We met at a small cafe halfway between our apartments. I got there first, and I'll be honest, I was nervous. Not angry, not defensive, just unsure. 12 years of friendship is a long time to potentially lose over one argument. When Emily walked in, the first thing I noticed was how different she looked. Not physically, but emotionally. She seemed tired. Not the dramatic, stressed version of tired I saw during wedding planning. Just worn out. We ordered coffee and sat down. For a few minutes we talked about completely normal things, work, the honeymoon, how strange it felt now that the wedding was over. Then there was this long pause. Finally, Emily said something I wasn't expecting. I owe you an apology. I didn't say anything at first because I genuinely wasn't sure where the conversation was going. She took a deep breath and said the months leading up to the wedding had been overwhelming. The planning, family expectations, money stress, all of it. She admitted she had become obsessed with trying to make everything perfect. And somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing the people around her as friends and started seeing them as parts of the event. Her words, not mine. Then she said something that stuck with me. You were the only one who actually pushed back. Apparently everyone else had mostly just gone along with whatever she wanted. But because I was her maid of honor and her closest friend, she expected me to always support her, even when she was being unreasonable. When I didn't, it felt like betrayal to her at the time. But after the wedding, when she started hearing from other people what actually happened that morning, she realized the situation wasn't as simple as she had told herself, especially after Mark confronted her about it. Apparently, Mark had been uncomfortable with some of the wedding drama too. He told Emily he thought she had gone too far with the bridesmaid situation. And when he heard the full story about what happened after I left, he told her something that made her rethink things. He asked her one question. If Alex hadn't said anything, would you have gone through with kicking Sarah out of the ceremony? Emily told me she didn't answer him right away, but the honest answer was probably yes. And that realization bothered her. So after all of that, you might assume everything is fixed now. That we hugged, apologized, and went back to being best friends. But that's not exactly what happened. Because, well, Emily apologized for how she acted. She also admitted something else. She said the months leading up to the wedding had revealed parts of her personality she didn't fully like. The pressure, the control issues, the way she handled conflict. And she's still figuring out what to do with that. At the same time, I told her something I had been thinking about since the wedding. I told her that walking out wasn't just about the bridesmaid situation. It was about the months of tension leading up to it, the way people were being treated, the constant pressure, and the fact that by the end, it didn't feel like the friendship we used to have. It felt like a job, a very stressful job. That part of the conversation was harder. Not angry, just honest. By the end of the conversation, we both kind of realized something. The friendship we had for 12 years probably isn't going to magically return to exactly what it was before. Too much happened. Too many things were said. But that doesn't necessarily mean the friendship is completely over either. Right now we're in this weird middle space. We're talking again. We've texted a few times since the cafe conversation. Nothing dramatic. Just normal things. Memes, random life updates, small steps. And honestly, that might be the healthiest way to handle it. Because sometimes relationships don't end with a huge explosion. Sometimes they just change shape. Before we left the cafe, Emily said something that surprised me. She said if she could redo the wedding day, she would have listened instead of doubling down. Then she laughed a little and said, "Also, I definitely wouldn't pick for $150 bridesmaid dresses again." So that's where things stand. The friendship isn't exactly what it used to be, but it's not completely gone either. And maybe that's the best outcome. We were going to get after everything that happened,